Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. We will discuss a very familiar topic with many of you, which plays a crucial role in your day-to-day lives, whether you know it consciously or not. Climate change has become an increasingly pertinent subject within the 21st century. With only increasing rates of global warming and distress on the environment that plays a factor in everyday person's life. Policies to counteract these rapidly increasing rates impact nearly every consumer, from the vehicle you drive to the price of your gas, and even to the price of your dinner tonight as you watch this podcast. Examples of these policy changes are in the form of carbon taxes, EV mandates, and net carbon neutrality goals. For countries to meet these ambitious climate targets and foster rapid decarbonization of our societies, these policies are essential. There is now a strong backlash against green policies. Consumers and politicians alike are beginning to recognize the actual cost of these green policies on their day-to-day lives. Joining us today is an expert on the backlash against these policies, Bruce.
It's a pleasure to join you today, Joe. While we can recognize that climate change is a very real problem that will affect the population in the future, and its consequences may be devastating, many skip the reality that these policies don't come without an extremely cost. A carbon tax essentially raises the prices of most things a consumer needs to sustain themselves in their day-to-day lives, and this tax leads the economy away from a Pareto-efficient state, where suppliers need to impose the entirety of a tax on the consumers buying meat in a grocery store, filling up their cars with gas, and even heating their homes. Voters are waking up to these increased prices and are fighting back by shifting their votes right and enacting movements to influence existing party members. Although these voters may believe in the effects of climate change, many feel it is unfair to promote reduced consumption by enacting policies that increase the cost of essentials, such as commuting, eating, and heating their homes.
Very interesting, Bruce. While many, including myself, assume that climate change policies are always for the better of society, it does make more sense that one must be experiencing the cost. But how would you respond to the reality that many of these concerns are exaggerated by influential right-wing politicians, such as the Prime Minister of UK, Rishi Sunak, stating that the metropolitan elite will grab your car and make you eat tofu?
Now, while exaggerations do frequently prevail from politicians, in order to persuade voters into making more drastic decisions based on opposing parties' climate change ideology, the reality is that these aggressive and prompt policies have drastic effects on consumers, including extremely asymmetric costs. An example of these costs is the farmers being shut down due to the methane production of their cows, who no longer have a livelihood to rely upon. The deadweight loss from these policies is only increasing over time.
But how can we determine an exact Pareto efficiency or deadweight loss as a social marginal cost of climate change? By seeing our forests burn, our water levels rise, and our children's children not living to see 50 certainly seems to be a factor we should be considering, looking at it with the increase in costs. Would you not agree? I mean, already in a study conducted by Yale University, a massive 74% of the Indian population has experienced the effects of global warming, with countless experiencing the loss of crops due to extreme heat and rains, which has only gotten worse as the years pass.
You are correct, Joe. Climate change will eventually reap disastrous costs against so many. Yet we have a reason for optimism. 2 years ago, the International Energy Agency estimated that nearly 50% of emissions reduction technologies needed to reach net zero by 2050 were not commercially available. And in only 2 years, that number has dropped to 35%. With the right technology commercially available to the average consumer and producer, these policies will not need to have such a drastic effect on consumers. It will be easier and more affordable to drive an RV, farm sustainably, and power your home.
That is certainly a reason to remain optimistic, but as of today, we can't be certain that the damage we're causing to our environment is repairable. Although the backlash is impeding efforts to reduce the effects of climate change, policymakers should still try to get to the root of the backlash, which is characterized by grievances with increased living costs. When designing climate policies, it appears that the path to least resistance and ultimate success would be to prioritize the immediate impacts of policies on consumers. An example of policies that have met less resistance from the general public is US President Joe Biden's subsidies and investments in key green investments, such as batteries, electric vehicles, and smart grids, which have emphasized the creation of jobs and protecting local economies. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our podcast.